Next section is keynote address. Dr. Neeta Kumari from Guru Nanak College, Punjab University is our guest today. I personally invite her to the keynote address and I request Dr. Karthika S.B., Assistant Professor of Sattangata DB College, to chair this session. Karthika, unmute.
Okay, sir. Sir, can you hear me? Sir, കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ?
Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Good morning. After an enlightening session from Dr. P.S. Radhakrishnan, sir, we are now beginning the keynote address of the first day of the 3-day webinar series on contemporary Indian literature organized by the Department of Malayalam, Kannur University. The organizers extend their warm and affectionate welcome to the academic community who have gathered here even in the troubling times of the pandemic. The cradle of civilization manifests herself in multiple dimensions across the vast cultural landscape of the subcontinent. Dr. Neeta Kumari, Head and Assistant Professor, Department of English, Guru Nanak College, Muktsar, Punjab, is second to none to speak on these magnificent facets of Indian fiction in English. Holding a doctorate in comparative literature from Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar, she has Indian writings as her field of research. Having 13 years of teaching experience, she has also been a research fellow at the Department of English of the university. Her publications include papers in English in international journals, in edited books, and the literary articles in Punjabi Tribune, the Punjabi newspaper. We are so glad that you are here with us, ma'am. Let us now welcome Dr. Neeta Kumari for the session Multiple Indias, Facets of Indian Fiction in English and Bhasha.
Namaskaram and a very happy morning to all of you. Am I audible and clear? Is my voice audible? The voice is fine, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really my greatest pleasure and privilege and also honor to me to be a part of this seminar. And I express my deep thanks to you, sir, Dr. K.K. Shivadas, HOD, Department of Malayalam, Kannur University, Kasaragod, and also to my friend, Dr. Thomas Scaria from Department of Malayalam, St. Thomas College, Pala, for his kind reference. To begin with, I would like to dwell on the theme of the seminar first. The theme of the seminar is contemporary Indian literature. Let us talk on these three terms first. Contemporary, what do we exactly mean by contemporary? Literature, what do we include in literature? And then Indian, how do we define India? What kind of India we talk about when we say Indian literature? So when we talk about contemporary, when we say contemporary, in the context of world literature, contemporary is regarded as the literature that has been written after World War II. But in the context of Indian literature, I would like to say that I have included the literature from where the tradition of Indo-Anglican tradition starts, like 930s, 1930s. From the time when the persons like Raja Rao, M.R. Anand or R.K. Narayan started to write literature. Why I have started from here? Because I think that literature is a tradition. It's tradition in a time, and time is a continuous flow. We cannot chop time in past, present, and future. And whatever is being written now, it has come to us from as a part of a tradition. So we must start from the starting, from the beginning. Then literature. What is literature for us? In literature, we include mainly three genres: poetry, drama, and then fiction. But today, we also include films as text in literature. In our research areas too, films have been included in as text in research fields. And then Indian, and that is the main thing I'll develop upon. The particular topic I'll be talking about fiction mainly, though there will be passing references from poetry, drama, and films too. But particularly, and I'll develop on fiction. So my topic is, let me read it for you. This is multiple Indias, facets of Indian fiction in English and Bhasha. Multiple Indias. So when we say Indian literature, what is the concept we are talking about? About which India we are writing, or which India we are seeing in these writings we say as Indian fiction. I'll begin with an Indian critic, G.N. Davy. He says, the term India may be valid in the pages of an atlas, but as a cultural label, it is hopelessly inadequate and simplistic. A product of colonial historiography, the term brings with it a politically colored self-image and the suggestion of cultural amnesia. What Davy is talking about, Davy says that India may be one as a geographical entity, but culturally it's a plural entity. Its plurality, its not being the one, its plurality, or its being a multicultural entity has been neglected by, has been rejected by, has been overlooked by the colonial historiography. The historiography, the history that has been written in India when it was under British rule, and after it, it has rejected India's cultural pluralism. So this is what G.N. Davy says, and he sees India as a culturally plural country. Now I'll come to Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie, in his book Imaginary Homelands, writes, I'll read for you. It may be that writers in my position, exiles or immigrants or expatriates, are haunted by some sense of loss, some urge to reclaim, to look back, even at the risk of being mutated into the pillars of salt. But if we do look back, we must do so in the knowledge which give rise to profound uncertainties that our physical alienation from India almost inevitably means that we will, in short, create fictions, not actual cities or villages, but invisible ones. Imaginary homelands, Indias of the mind. So, what Salman Rushdie talks about, he talks about not of the real India, not the India that is there physically, really, but India of the mind. What do the expatriate writers, what do the immigrant writers think about India? In what way they imagine about their homeland that is far away from them, that is at distance, that is not in sight, and that is invisible for them. So for those who are away from India and still are writing about India, their picture is totally different from them who are placed in India and writing about India. So then again, another difference. We have talked about the plurality of India instead of it being a monolithic entity. But which India do we actually talk about when we discuss Indian English literature or Bhasha literature? Again, that is another concept that comes in. One is Indian English literature, literature that is being written, that has been written, that is being written in English originally. And another genre is, type is, category is Bhasha literature. Bhasha literature, that literature that is being written in regional languages and has come into English, mainstream English, through translations. Now, how do we interpret the plurality of India? It is the basis of this plurality is the multicultural entity of India, as G.N. Devi says, or the position of the writer, the location of the writer, as Salman Rushdie opines. Do the writers taking English as their medium of expression focus on the same India as those writing in regional languages? If no, what becomes the basis of difference? If the India of the expatriate and India of those who are located in India is different, so what is the basis of difference? So to find the answer to these questions, I have divided Indian literature into three broad categories. First is immigrant writers, second is India-based writers, and then there are regional writers whose works are available in English translation. In the first category, that is among immigrant writers, I've already quoted Salman Rushdie, a novelist belonging to the post-modernist phase of Indian English novel. Now I would like to refer to Raja Rao from its early phase. Raja Rao is known for its public pronouncement about his India of the mind, being the spiritual India of Vedantas. Raja Rao, when he talked about India, he talked about that India that had an image that were formed by Vedantas. He states in his foreword to Kanthapura, that was published in 1938. Raja Rao said, "We cannot write only as Indians. We have grown to look at the large world as part of us." So Raja Rao proclaimed that the expatriate writers, the immigrant writers, the writers who are placed away from India, though they are Indian, though they are writing about India, but still they cannot write only as Indians, because they have assumed, they have acquired a world entity. They have assimilated the world around them in themselves. Here, when he says this, he acknowledges the necessity of a post-colonial hybridity, illustrating it along with his idea of India very well in his second novel, the other novel, The Serpent and the Rope. It was published in 1960 after independence. In this novel, besides the Ramayana, the Upanishadic and the Puranic precepts and tales, Rao weaves in the Chinese and Western lore quite comfortably into each other. Now, doing this, he sets an example when he says that they cannot write only as Indians. The protagonist of this novel is The Serpent and the Rope. The protagonist is Ramaswamy. He is an immigrant South Indian research scholar. Ramaswamy argues throughout the book that his Hindu India is in deep conflict with the Christian West of his wife Madeline, who is a French teacher. There is a conflicting situation. His India is a Hindu India. His wife's world is Christian West. So there is a conflict. But during his visit to India, Ramaswamy is unable to relate to the real India. His India of his mind is India of the Vedantas. But when he actually visits India and sees the reality there, he sees that this India, this real India, is the India of greedy Brahmins, of westernized intellectuals, of pompous politicians. His India is not the India which exists as a specific geographical and cultural entity, rather than spiritual India, which is more real to them. So he wants to live with his image that is there in his mind of India, that is Hindu India, Brahmical India, pure India, spiritual India, but he cannot reconcile with India, with the corruption that is there in real India. Thus, Raja Rao's idea of hybrid multicultural identity makes it clear that the feeling of belonging to a larger universe has been with the immigrant writers since the early phase of Indian English novel. And it was not as a result of the recent process of globalization or the rise of information, development of information technology. However, since the rise of the contemporary metropolitan postmodern literary theories, it is thought that in an age of instant communications, it is old-fashioned to belong to any one place. Ejaz Ahmed, in his book In Theory, says that for immigrant writers, all cultures available to him as a resource for consumption, but he actually belongs in all of them because he belongs to none. So the situation of an immigrant writer is that he belongs to all the cultures of the world, but actually he has lost his roots. He is rooted into none. Therefore, another critic, Vinay Kirpal, opines that the international writer, the international style is privileged over non-migrant writers whose style may better fit the representation of his own society. So here comes the difference between the picture of India that is presented by an immigrant writer and a writer who is very much located in his own society. So with this we come to non-migrant writers, India-based writers. How India-based writers project India? Here we will take simultaneously the both English writers and Bhasha writers available in English through translation. From the first generation of Indian writers and the contemporary of Raja Rao we talked about, at home the contemporary of Raja Rao were M.R. Anand and R.K. Narayan. In contrast to Raja Rao's Brahminic India, Anand exposed the claim of this high culture and angered at the caste and the class inequalities of hierarchical Hindu society by depicting the humiliating experience of Bakha, a sweeper and the protagonist of his first novel, Untouchable. Untouchable was published in 1935. R.K. Narayan presented Malgudi as a microcosm of India as a whole. It is shown to be the quintessential Indian town, ordinary and uneventful, where shopkeepers ply their easygoing traders, idlers sit around the market street gutters, benign crooks go about their business of cheating gullible people, husbands absent-mindedly torture their wives, all in a gentle and unchanging rhythm. What is always emphasized as Indianness here, by which is meant a good-humored inertia and a casual tolerance which almost any reader in the country is expected to recognize as familiar. This is what Meenakshi Mukherjee says about R.K. Narayan's novel and his presentation of India, his presentation of Malgudi as a microcosm of India. Again, like Anand N. Rao, Narayan portrays a Hindu India through Malgudi, which is eternal and immutable. So this was Indian English writers, how they were presenting India. So we see that Indian English writers, though no matter they are placed away from India or in India, they show India as a monolithic entity, something immutable, something unchanging. In contrast, we come to Bhasha writers. Bhasha writers who are placed in the society they are writing about, and they are writing in the language of the people they write about. With this, I come to a Punjabi writer, Gurdial Singh. I think Gurdial Singh, a world-known writer, and you people might be knowing about Gurdial Singh. He has won Sahitya Akademi Award and also Gyanpith Award. So I'll be talking about Gurdial Singh's Anhoe. In Punjabi, Anhoe means the people who never were, who are non-existent, who are non-being for the larger society, whose existence is not in any way important or significant for those who are in power. So Gurdial Singh writes about those people. Gurdial Singh was a resident of Malwa region of Punjab, and the place where he lived all through his life and he wrote there is not very far from the place I am located. He was from Jeto, some 40 kilometers from the place I am located. My city is Muktsar, and Gurdial Singh lived at Jeto, some 40-45 kilometers away from my place. So this is Malwa region. Malwa region, a region that is considered not very developed, and at the time Gurdial Singh was living and writing, it was a remote area. So Gurdial Singh write about this region in the language we actually speak in this region, Malwai Punjabi. We call it, the region is Malwa, and the dialect of Punjabi we speak here is called Malwai Punjabi. So his novels, Gurdial Singh's novels, are in Malwai, the language actually spoken by the people who live here. So I'm talking about Anhoe. Anhoe is located in a mandi. Now mandi is a market. All the agricultural communities in Punjabi know very well the word mandi. It's a market where agricultural produce is sold. The farmers bring their produce in a mandi to be sold, and where the habitation developed around that market area, that grew into a town, and that also was called a mandi. That town was also called a mandi. So placing locating his story in a mandi, Gurdial Singh talks about a time where feudalistic society, Punjabi feudalistic society, was changing into a capitalistic society. The values were changing. The old closely woven village community were splitting, and how it affected the family relations that he depicts in his novel. But unlike the resistance to change life in Malgudi, if we compare it with the India that has been shown by R.K. Narayan, R.K. Narayan's Malgudi is resistant to change. The rhythm of life goes on in a monotonous way there. There is no change. Mondays are marked by continuous changes. I've already told you that it was from feudalistic to capitalistic. The change was from feudalistic to capitalistic. The change initiated by the British Empire was continued even in independent India. The result was that the lives of the masses were governed by money, and it changed the whole attitude of people towards life. It is also important to note here that in contrast to a Hindu India of Rao, Anand and also Narayanan, Gurdial Singh shows a society where Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims live together. It's not a Hindu India. It's a composite culture. It shows a composite culture where all the people of all the communities, Hindu, Sikh and Muslims live together. And similarly, now we come to another writer. This is Phanishwar Nath Renu. Phanishwar Nath Renu was placed in Bihar, and he wrote about the life which he had lived, which was lived in that particular region, and his novels were hailed in Hindi as Anchalik Upanyas. Anchalik means regional novel. He wrote in such a way, such a manner that the place, the location, the space that was shown through his novels, the space also became one of the characters in the novels. So in Renu's, I will talk about Phanishwar Nath Renu's novel Mehla Anchal. Mehla Anchal, in Mehla Anchal, Renu presents a kaleidoscopic view of life of village Meriganj. The village is Meriganj. There is depiction of caste and class divisions and conflicts, poverty of the villagers, their festival and rituals, illiteracy and superstitions, moral corruptions in religious places, sexual exploitation of women. The narrative describes the villagers' participation in freedom movement from 1942 to the gaining of Swaraj. The happening after independence and the after effect of Santhal struggle are also part of the people. Renu makes a difference. Unlike Raja Rao, M.R. Anand, or R.K. Narayan, or even Gurdial Singh, Renu brings in tribal people of India into picture. Tribal people, which have been invisible hitherto in Indian English novel. So the Santhal community is a tribal community that has been brought into light by Renu through his novels, and this feature take a center stage. Tribal community take a center stage in the writings of Mahashweta Devi. I hope you all know about Mahashweta Devi. She particularly wrote about women, Dalit community, and tribal community. Here I will talk about tribal community, and particularly of her novel Pterodactyl, Puran Sahai and Partha, that was published somewhere in 1991, and that is as quoted by Mahashweta Devi, that has the essence of her tribal experiences. Mahashweta Devi was an activist turned writer. She was a social activist first. Throughout her life, she struggled for, strived for the rights of Dalits and tribal peoples, who were the primal inhabitants of India. But with the passage of time, with the coming of British and after independence also they were pushed into background to the margins, and in some cases even beyond the margins. So the India that Mahashweta Devi talks about is tribal India that is invisible for most of the population of India, most of the readers of Indian fiction. Mahashweta Devi, in this novel, I'm quoting Pterodactyl, Puran Sahai, and Pirtha. Mahashweta Devi shows a tribal community that comes to know about Indian independence after 40 years. After 40 years of India's gaining Swaraj, that community comes to know that India has gained independence after all. So the time of the novel is 1987. So when a block development officer goes to that village, that is Pirtha. Pirtha is the name of the village, somewhere located in Madhya Pradesh. Then the tribals come to know that India has gained independence. But that is the beginning of a nightmare for them, because though in our 5-year plans, in our constitutions, we have Indians, we as the Socialist Republic acknowledge that uh, tribal community of India has an share in the uh, benefits of development of India, in the shining India. But Mahashweta Devi shows that actually after gaining independence, though so much has been said, so much has been spent, and so much has been earmarked from tribal welfare for tribal welfare, but tribals are going into extinction in the name of development. So this is totally a new type of India, an invisible India that Mahashweta Devi brings into picture. So this is again, what would you say, that another aspect of Indian writing, another facet of Indian writing, or one picture of India from multiple Indias. And this is possible also only in Bhasha writings, because if uh, the real if a writer wants to about real India, the India that we proclaim, that we claim that India lives in the villages, that must be done in Bhasha writings, that can be done in Bhasha writings. So the presentation of this cultural diversity of India, which comes in Indian English literature through translation, is lacking in mainstream English literature, where a greater pull is towards homogenization. This is what has been termed as cultural amnesia by Jane Davy, quoted in the beginning. Actually, how Meenakshi Mukherjee calls it, how Meenakshi Mukherjee, a major critic in Indian literature, how she puts it, she says, any project of constructing a national identity is predicated upon two simultaneous imperatives: an erasure of differences within the border and accentuating the differences with what lie outside. So when the writers want to erase the differences within the borders, they write in English. And when they want to highlight the differences, highlight the cultural plurality, the socio-economic plurality of India, the culturally different India, they write in their regional languages. So as a language, English in India automatically achieves the first, and the second is facilitated when a homogeneous Indian tradition is pitted against an equally unified imaginary West. Why in writers writing in English want to present it as a monolithic entity? Why Indian English writers try to homogenize India? Because this is due to the fact that they are writing for a readership that is that has been trained to see a nation as something homogenized, because this is a Western tradition. When Western traditions, countries, nations are homogenized. So in the same way, the Indian English writers also homogenize India so that their English readership is comfortable with that image of India that they are presenting. Then there are, I will like to quote some, not some, just one of the dramatists that wrote about India. How a dramatist present India. I would like to quote Girish Karnad. Girish Karnad, who was a playwright and originally wrote in Kannada. Girish Karnad's play Tughlaq. In Tughlaq, he tries to present a picture of India that was the India after first 20 years of gaining independence. I would like to read a quote from U.R. Ananthamurthy, how he puts Kannad. U.R. Ananthamurthy quotes Kannad, who says about his play Tughlaq, "What struck me absolutely about Tughlaq's history was that it was contemporary. The fact that here was the most idealistic, most intelligent king ever to come on the throne of Delhi, and one of the greatest failures also. And within a span of 20 years, this tremendously capable man had gone to pieces. This seemed to be both due to his idealism as well as the shortcomings within him. And I felt in the early 60s, India had also come very far in the same direction. The 20 years period seemed to me very much a striking parallel." So, Tughlaq was a political allegory that through which Girish Karnad tried to present a picture of India that was after 20 years of gaining independence. There is another picture that is presented by some poets. I take two poets, Faiz Ahmed Faiz and Faiz Ahmed Faiz, an Urdu poet, and Gulzar, a contemporary poet. Faiz Ahmed Faiz said about the disillusionment that all the intellectuals appeared after the things went after gaining independence. He said, "ये दाग दाग उजाला, ये शब गजीदा सहर, था इंतजार जिसका, ये वो सहर तो नहीं." I will translate it for you. This scarred, stained light, this night-stung morning, sure, this is not the morn that we waited long for. So, this couplet very clearly shows the disillusionment that all the intellectuals experienced after gaining the Swaraj. This is in line with what Karnad done through his play Tughlaq. And a very known poet, Gulzar, he says about India, हिंदुस्तान में दो दो हिंदुस्तान दिखाई देते हैं। एक है जिसका सर बादल में है, दूसरा है जिसका पांव दलदल में है। मीन one can see two Indias in India. The one is whose head is in the sky, the other is whose feet are in the mire. So these are opposite pictures of India that is being presented by the literary writers in fiction, in drama, in poetry. And these are all very different. The differences are somewhere on the level of social, somewhere economic, somewhere cultural, and somewhere political also. Now I would like to quote a film, because these days we tend to take films also at text. Slumdog Millionaire. Slumdog Millionaire, what kind of India it present? I hope many of the people present here must have seen this film. So what type of India is presented in Slumdog Millionaire? Slumdog, the title indicates, it presents India that is, it presents a, I would like to say, soiled picture of India. India with all its corruption, India with all its poverty, illiteracy, greed, and violence. And then another picture that was a Hollywood film, but what kind of, it was striking what part of India it presents. The film was The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. The hero was Brad Pitt. In a part of the story, the film shows Brad Pitt visiting India, and leaving all the India aside, the hero is shown on a ghat, probably Ganga Ghat, with all its uncleanliness, its dirtiness. So for the West, India is India that is very much focused on religion, and not a India that dwells upon the scientific ideas. So this was what I had thought to discuss with you about different pictures of India. Another feature that I would like to bring to your notice about Indian fiction, that is being written in regional languages, about Bhasha literature. That the history that is being written through fiction. There was a time when fiction was considered, the word fiction was considered exactly opposite of reality. But the type of fiction that is being written in regional languages these days, and the novels I have quoted for you, be it Gurdyal Singh, be it Mahashweta Devi, or the other writings, other writers in the same vein, they are writing not the stories based on totally imagination. Rather, their stories are fit to be categorized as docu-fiction. The location is very real, the language is very real, the conflicts and the problems are very real. Just the names have been changed of the characters. Some of the characters are very much there, we can find them in our real life. Just the names have been changed, as the names are changed often in newspaper stories. So these fictional writings are a challenge to the official discourse of history and present the people and the problem that have been effaced by, that have been overlooked by, or that have been uh, uh, put into margins by the dominant discourse of history. The India that have been made invisible, though these are working class in Punjab, though the tribals living in different parts of the country, be it the people living in the remote villages in Bihar or Odisha or West Bengal, all these people are brought into light through these fictional writings, who are, where I would say, I have said before too, where the location, the place play the role of a character, play a major role to to uh, bring the meaning of the writing before its readership. So these writings, in a way, deconstruct the history that is being that is there in the official discourse. Just give me a minute. My laptop needs to be recharged. Just a second. So this was all about I wanted to discuss with you on this theme. Now, if anything that is you want to discuss with me.
Thank you, ma'am, for this interesting and engaging section. Taking us through these varied ideas requires great preparation and dedication involved to gather data. Your Jack also reveals a wonderful teacher who can inspire a new generation of intellectuals. Now, the session is open for discussion. Those who are interested in asking doubts or express their ideas are most welcome to do the same. You can either post your doubts in chat box or speak through your microphones.
No questions, I think. I prepared this discussion to be a springboard for you to think upon new ideas, new aspects of research, and to see the writings you read. This is for the research scholars and the students that must be present here in this webinar. So the way you see the writings you have in hand. So yes,
Madam,
I would like to ask anything.
Madam, I have one doubt. I want to share with you. Is there any multiplicity in the Indian English writing? You said in Bhasha literature or Bhasha literature it is evident or it is present. So, is there any multiplicity you can find in the Indian English writing?
Yes, sir. So multiplicity in the way I would say that that is I'm talking about my range of reading. So definitely what Raja Rao has written, what M.R. Anand has written, or R.K. Narayan has written, they are talking about Hindu India. And Salman Rushdie, or for that matter, Rohinton Mistry is writing about Rohinton Mistry. He is placed in Canada. Salman Rushdie is placed in UK. They are writing about metropolitan India, that is major cities of India. But still, I would like to say that it's upon my reading. What my reading says, that the layers of reality that we find in bhasha writings, we don't find that those layers in English writings. I have quoted Gurdial Singh, Renu, Mahashweta Devi. I have read Fakir Mohan Senapati in Odia writing. U.R. Ananthamurthy I have read. So the layers of social reality, the layers of meaning, the socio-economic, cultural, all the realities in an amalgamated whole that are present in bhasha writings, I haven't found that in English writing. That was my observation. This is my observation.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your question.
Are there any more questions?
Participants can write your questions in the chat box also.
Hi, ma'am.
Yes.
Hi, ma'am. My name is Jobin.
Yes.
Good
Yes,
afternoon.
Jobin. Yes,
Good
Jobin.
afternoon,
I can
ma'am.
hear you.
My question is, how political attitudes affect the freedom of Indian writers?
How political attitudes affect the freedom of Indian writers?
Indian writers. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think that political attitudes, the effect of political attitudes, the impact of political attitudes vary from person to person. It's not the matter of Indian writer or English writer or any other writer. Whether when you write, whether you are conscious of the political acceptance and want to write in the same vein, or whether you write in sync with the political ideology of the time, it is a writer's own choice. So it has nothing to do with the fact that whether the writing belongs to India or any other country or any other language for that matter. Yes,
What is
sir.
the fate of regional literature?
Dr. Kartika? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. There is another question by Dr. Thomas Courier, sir. Sorry. What is the fate of regional literature in digital era?
What
That
is
is
the
in
fate
chat
of
box, ma'am.
Okay. What is the fate of regional literature in digital era? Okay. Sir, this is really a very interesting question, and thank you so much for asking this. I think that digital era will not able to make the regional literature extinct that we all are afraid about. The era of reading books will always be there. So regional literature, as is my experience in Punjab, in Haryana, or in the regions around my place, it will not be able to affect it negatively. So the future is shining bright. The future of regional languages, regional writings is surely bright, as far as I can see that.
I hope there are no more questions. Okay, ma'am. Let me now welcome Archana B. Is there any question? Okay. Let me now welcome Archana B, Research Scholar, Department of English, St. Thomas College, Palay, for the vote of thanks.
Good noon, everyone. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I would like to thank Dr. Nida Kumari, Head of the Department of English, Guru Nanak College, Punjab, the webinar speaker, for enlightening us with your knowledge. Today's webinar was full of knowledge and interesting things. It gave deep insights into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts regarding Indian fiction. We got certain relevant information regarding immigrant writers and several other Indian writers. I'm pretty sure that the precious knowledge that Dr. Nida Kumari gave us will definitely help us in our studies and it will help us for our studies. I thank Dr. Karthika SB, the moderator of the webinar. I thank the coordinators of this webinar. Thanks to all the participants of this webinar for paying your attention. Once again, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitha, for your vibrant and excellent speech.
Thank you so much, sir. It has been an honor for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.